You're good to go.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Maine Tribal Populations. Today is October 30th, and it's good to see you all after a little bit of a hiatus. Want to welcome you and thank Katie again for making this possible. Want to make sure everyone knows that we are recording this meeting and are streaming live today. We will start off, make sure that everyone has an agenda. If you all have an agenda, then we will get started with welcome and introductions. My name is Rachel Talbot Ross, and I serve as the chair of the Permanent Commission. I have to apologize right now because there is some construction right outside the window, so I apologize for any noise that seeps in. But why don't we go around and have the commissioners introduce themselves one by one. We'll start with Vice Chief Newell.
Yes, good morning, Vice Chief Newell. It's good to be among you folks again. It's been some time, so nice to see you all. Thank you.
And Vice Chief, I'm just going to ask you for the record to state who and what you're representing on the commission.
Representing the Passamaquoddy tribe for tribal population.
Thank you. We can just go around. I see Garrett, James, Bruce, and then Isaiah, Ian, and Joby.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Garrett Stewart. I am a member of the AFL-CIO Executive Committee, and I represent labor on the commission. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
James?
Oh, it's James.
Oh, sorry, everyone. James Marl, I'm a policy analyst with the Maine Center for Economic Policy. I'm representing a seat on the commission for an organization with economic policy experience.
I'm Bruce King. I work in Lewiston doing workforce development, and I filled the seat of impacted community member.
I'm Isaiah Reed. I'm a student at University of Maine Farmington, and I'm representing youth population on the commission.
Hey, good morning. My name is Ian Yaffe, and I'm with Mano and Mano, here representing an organization that works with immigrant communities.
Hi, everyone. Joby Thoyelo from Maine Equal Justice. And I'm serving in the role of a representative of a statewide organization that works on policy related to poverty. And I'm also in a place, despite what it looks like, that has a lot of construction going on. So I will stay on mute as much as I can.
Thank you. Reverend Lewis.
Is it my turn? I'm
Yes,
sorry, apologies for my lateness. Reverend Kenneth Lewis. I serve on the commission as a gubernatorial appointment for faith-based perspectives and organizations.
Well, thank you all and welcome again. I'd like for Cheryl Davis with the Department of Labor, if she would kindly introduce herself for the record.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Davis, and I'm with the Maine Department of Labor State Workforce Board, and I am providing administrative support for this commission.
Thank you. And just for the record, Keith Bisson with CEI, and Ambassador Dana with the Penobscot Nation, Chief Sabatis, and Vice Chief Sillaboy all send their regrets. We will be joined a little bit later by Professor Marcel Medford and Dee Clark. So when they come, we will have them give them a welcome and have them introduce themselves. We also will be joined in a few minutes by some guests, and we'll interrupt our meeting to welcome them. So want to make sure that no one has any corrections or revisions for our agenda today. Just open it up in case you do. Seeing none, we will move on to the organizational development. We are going to talk about the meeting schedule, having our work plan, and also the status of bringing on a staff member from the Volunteers of America. So I will start off with our meeting schedule, and again, acknowledge that we have had a little bit of a hiatus between our last meeting in which we released our report and today, and appreciate everyone's patience in putting today's meeting together. You should have received an email that outlined our meeting schedule for the remainder of the year. Did everyone receive the meeting schedule? So for the record, thank you. For the record, we will continue to meet from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We are going to alternate on Wednesdays and Fridays every week between now and the end of the year, except for the weeks of Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, and Christmas, unless this commission decides to schedule something during those weeks. So if everyone is okay with that schedule, not seeing any objections, then Cheryl Davis will post our meetings now to the public and to our interested parties list so that everyone has advance notice of when we will be meeting. And I thank you all for your commitment to that time. The Permanent Commission, as you all know, we'll just recap for anyone who is listening. The Permanent Commission was generously awarded a grant through the Volunteers of America, Northern New England, in order to hire a part-time research associate. That research associate is in place for us for 1 calendar year once that person has been hired. The Volunteers of America has done a solicitation, a job announcement, and received quite a bit of response. They are now in the process of filtering those resumes and would like for 1 or 2 members from the commission to join them in a review of those resumes so that we can start interviewing and hopefully bring someone on board at the very beginning of the year. I believe you all have seen a job description. If not, I'll make sure that that is sent to you again, just to refresh your memory. But this person is going to help us fulfill our mission around a data-driven process. So by providing that kind of research and data to the commission for our work. So if you have any questions about that, I'd be glad to take them. But if I could ask if anyone would like to join me in the review of those resumes and in the process, I believe that we would be asking about a total of maybe 3 hours of your time total. If anyone would like to join me, I open it up for discussion.
I'm interested in joining.
Thank you, Joby.
Do you have a time frame around when you'd be meeting and doing that, or would it be just on our own time and then collaboration?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Bruce. Depending on who becomes part of that hiring team, we can make that decision according to our own our schedules, our collective schedules. So I think what the process will look like is we all have a set of criteria in the job description on our own, go through all of the resumes. There are quite a few of them, I must say. Go through all of those resumes and rank them according to the criteria. And then we would schedule meetings to discuss the folks we'd like to interview and go from there. I will say, Bruce, that this process needs to happen immediately. So starting next week, whatever that small team from the commission is, plus the president and CEO of Volunteers of America, we would start to work on reviewing resumes immediately. So Joby has graciously agreed to look through resumes. Any other interest?
I'm interested, but I have to look at what my time commitments look like next week, which may make it difficult. But otherwise, I'll say I'm interested. Non-committal. I'm sorry.
No, not to worry, because what we can do is just include you in the emails and the communication, and you can just let us know what your time looks like. No pressure at all, Bruce.
So I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
So there's the vetting of the resumes. Is there a hiring panel that someone from this commission would be invited to participate in?
So thank you, Reverend Lewis, for the question. That's what I'm asking for help with right now.
Okay.
The folks who vet the resumes would participate in the interviews.
Okay.
And what we can do, just in case you want to think about it, is we can easily send out an email immediately after the meeting and remind folks that this is an opportunity that you can participate in if you'd like. That way, if you want to think about it, then you can. Thank you very, very much. Well, just checking on time. It's 11:16. We have a few more minutes before our guests join us. So I'd like to open up discussion now on our work plan. As you remember, we had made a decision at our last meeting to do two things chronologically. One is to create a work plan that will take us from January to the end of June of 2021, with the hope that we would be able to engage a consultant who would lead us in what we're calling a multi-year strategic planning process that will coincide with the fiscal year of the state. So towards that end, is that clear that we're doing a kind of an interim step to get to our strategic plan? If you remember, Ian worked quite a bit on getting us a budget that has gone into the considerations for the biennium. And so that will coincide, that all will start to now coincide with one another, our request for monies and our strategic planning process. So the work plan, I have good news about the work plan. With the meeting schedule that we've already approved, I've been able to secure a facilitator for that. Many of you will know her as Crystal Williams. She is an attorney with Bernstein Shore here in Maine, located in Portland. She's going to help facilitate those meetings. She will also do a little bit of the prep work and then facilitate those meetings. And then she is responsible for producing and writing the work plan. We hope that we can get this done through the meeting schedule that we have set up, but I would be prepared for some additional works to happen in between the meetings, maybe in small groups, some small group work. So that is, I am right now working with the state of Maine to get Crystal hired. And so she will be in place within the next 2 weeks, which we will then start that process. Any questions about the work plan itself?
Nope, I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for pulling that all together. I've recently worked with Crystal on a project and had a really great experience. So I look forward to working with her again.
Yeah, I'm very excited about working with her as well. So I said that we would bring Crystal on board in 2 weeks. The reason for a 2-week delay is today, as you know, we're going to be talking with the co-chairs of the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee, of which our colleague James Mail sits on that recovery committee. We're going to be updated with their work and also talk generally about the recommendations that they're going to move forward to the Mills administration. And I believe that part of our discussion today is to engage us in thinking about those recommendations. So we'll do that today. The next 2 meetings, I'm hoping that James, who I think has agreed, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we will get an update from the Maine Center for Economic Policy about the ways in which we need to understand the impact of COVID-19 on our economy and get really well versed in that. And then the third meeting before we start to engage Crystal would be with a member of the state legislature's Appropriations and Financial Services Committee, AFA. We've presented to them in the past. But we'd like for you all to get a really firm understanding as much as possible about the state of the economy, the impact of COVID and the recovery, and also what the state's budget process looks like, because that body of knowledge will help us write our work plan within the right framework of what's happening in the state with our economy. So I'll just open that up for discussion. That's the pathway to get to the work plan and working with Crystal. And any questions or comments or discussion?
So Rachel, were you thinking that the presentation from MECEP would be next week effectively?
So we can do it either way. We can have AFA come next week, and then MECEP the following week. It really, it's your calendar, your schedules.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks time would actually probably work better for us, partly because we're just wrapping up our annual State of Working Maine report, which this year focuses on the experiences of people of color in the workplace. So, and that's not going to be released until the 9th. So but if we did it in 2 weeks, I could certainly incorporate a lot of the stuff from that report into some sort of presentation. So that would probably work best for me.
That would be great, James. The other way to do it, obviously, is to schedule you off for within 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks. But also, if you're waiting to release information, part of the work plan can include a presentation on the release of the state, of your working plan. The state. What is it? What's the title of the work?
So it's a series that we do one every year. The State of Working Maine is what we call it.
State of Work. Yeah. So we can always just write that in and say that one of the first things we do is get briefed on that, if out of respect for your release date. Absolutely. Yeah.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's vitally important that we go down this pathway of understanding the budget, the kind of the forecast, the legislative process that might be going before us, as we not just deal with our work plan, but as we think about our strategic plan, whether or not it's going to follow a biennial kind of process as the state kind of deals with the reality that James and others who study this see where we're going to be, so that we're as informed as possible to know what levers and buttons to pull or push to try to advance our work. And so thank you for having AFA. And I look forward to the next report from MECEP as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think what we really need to start to kind of almost build a culture around for the commission is, this ongoing wave of education. We've talked about the need for us to do training on specific topics, like tribal state relations and what the Indian Land Claims Settlement Act is, and the state of restorative justice. I mean, thematically, we've talked about the need for us to always access some kind of training and education. But really what we're talking about is creating a learning community amongst ourselves. And no one will be an expert on the budget or the economy, certainly not after a 1 hour or 90-minute conversation on it. So I don't want to set us up that, you got 90 minutes to learn everything about the state budget process. So we will go in and out of this a lot. We will establish a pace for ourselves and go in and out of it. So yeah, it works for everyone. Does that make sense, everyone? Yeah. So in that regard, Reverend Lewis, you're really pretty good about this, but I want to encourage others, when you come across any materials or articles, podcasts, book, whatever that looks like, that you'd like for us, the rest of your colleagues to take in, make sure you send that on to me and to Cheryl, so that we can start to establish that learning library that you can access whenever you want. And it's really in one place, so you don't have to go searching for it, the email that had the link and that kind of stuff. So that's the goal. I'm gonna check in, it's 11:25, to see if our guests have joined us.
You're muted, Rachel. I don't know if you
Thank-
intend to be muted.
I do see that our guests have joined us, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today at the Permanent Commission's meeting. If you could, we are being live streamed and this meeting is being recorded. If you could just take a moment to introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Certainly, we'd be happy to. Thank you all for having us. My name is Anthony Ronzio. I'm Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, and I'm joined by Maria Pavic from my office. And we are the GoPIF staff supporting the Governor's Economic Recovery Commission.
Thank you very, very much. Welcome. We want to make this as easy as possible to have a conversation about what's happening. So let's see.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I see a couple other folks who may not have had an opportunity to introduce themselves. They're new to the meeting, Kathy St. John and Ms. LaChance.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Why don't we take a moment and let you introduce yourselves and welcome.
I'll go ahead, I guess. I am in for Clarissa Sabatis. She wanted me to sit in on this meeting. I'm a little late. I had an appointment before this, but I'm excited to see this group. I'm a council member, and my job also is a housing director, so it's good to get involved in everything. So it's good to be here.
Well, welcome, Kathy. Can you just state for the record the tribe that you represent?
Oh. Yeah, I'm with Houghton Band of Maliseets. Sorry.
No. Thank you. We're really pleased to have you here today. Thank you, Kathy, and thank the Chief Sabatis for us.
I will.
Yeah, and Laurie, you're here. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you as well. My name's Laurie LaChance. I'm currently the president of Thomas College, formerly state economist. So worked a lot with policymakers over the many years. And I serve as the co-chair of the Economic Recovery Committee, and so thankful to be with you today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I see that Professor Medford has now been able to join on. Professor Medford is a commissioner for the Permanent Commission, and we'll welcome you and ask you to introduce yourself and what appointment you had for the commission.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being late. I just wrapped up class. That's why I'm here. My name is Marcel Medford. I'm a professor of sociology and Africana studies at Bates College. And my role on the commission is as a sort of scholar of race, history, and social things.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Laurie, if are we waiting for Josh to join us as well, or should we proceed?
Yes, we should proceed. Maria and Tony are going to do the first part, and I just snuck in a little early, and Josh will be joining us soon, and Josh and I will pick up from there. So
great. Well, we'll turn it over right now to Maria and Tony, and thank you all again for being here.
No problem. We do have some slides we can put up on the screen, if that's okay. So if I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can see that. And then Maria's going to give us the overview of kind of to give the commission a sense of where we are to date. We have a member of the commission, James Mile, our commission on this commission, James Mile, who can also chime in on anything that we see here. So let me get my screen up and we will get started.
Great. Thank you everyone so much for having us, and thank you for your really amazing work on your September report on the review of the legislation. That's been very helpful to our committee, as well as your tool, your framing tool, and your questions that you use to analyze legislation has been circulated amongst our committee, and we've really appreciated the work you've done. Again, I'm Maria Millard-Pavic. I'm a senior policy analyst in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. And I've had the great privilege to staff this Economic Recovery Committee and work very closely with Laurie LaChance and Josh Broder. The committee was formed in May by the governor. Members were appointed. And the committee has had really two phases of work. The first phase of work was to stabilize and support Maine's economy. And so the committee was broken up into 6 different subcommittees, sector-based subcommittees, to really try to understand how the pandemic was impacting those sectors and populations across the state, and what sort of actions needed to be taken critically to address the impacts of the pandemic. So the committee worked for several months to put together some recommendations for our July 15th report. That was sort of the end of phase 1. And now our committee is in phase 2, which is the sustain and grow phase, really focusing on how to bridge back to the 10-year economic plan. How do we get back to where we were headed before the pandemic? This committee, as you can tell, has been working on a very fast timeline. I wonder, we wonder if it is, if it was sort of put together and report created in sort of like record time. And so that means the committee members have had to dedicate significant amount of time to this work while also dealing with the crisis in their own lives, in their businesses, in their communities. This committee is, like I said, it's a volunteer committee with no real authority to implement or appropriate. Our job is simply to make recommendations to the governor and the administration, and to help inform the legislature and to inform stakeholders and partners around the state. Let's see, Tony, next slide, please. And I am going to hand it off. Well, actually, before I hand it off to Tony, I want to talk about the way that the committee has been thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As soon as we kicked off the committee, it was a major part of the conversation, because as we were exploring and starting to see the data come in about the impacts of the pandemic on the state of Maine, we recognized very quickly how disproportionately it was impacting people of color, women, marginalized populations. And so that conversation, that research and that data that we gathered from the Boston Fed, from the Department of Labor, from DHHS, really informed the way we shaped our July 15th recommendations to support Maine people, Maine employers, and invest in Maine's infrastructure. So I'm going to just hand it off to Tony to walk you through those recommendations and sort of the thinking behind them.
Thanks, Maria. And apologies in advance. I've had to lock my 2 puppies out of my office, so if you hear any scratching in the background, it only means they want to come in. To echo Maria's point about the speed and the complexity of the early work of this of the Economic Recovery Committee, it's roughly a 40-member committee. It has designees from all 4 congressional offices, as well as the Maine legislature and the citizen appointments. The committee and its various subcommittees met over 70 times over 8 weeks, and its initial time and its initial period to really understand what was happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, get any sense at all data-wise about the impacts across the state, and generate some significant significant actions and recommendations with an order of magnitude, and those are the funding numbers that you see here, that the commission felt was commensurate with the crisis that was unfolding. So these are the July 15th recommendations, our first report, our Stabilize and Support report of the ERC, which took a look at the availability of funding through the CARES Act, through the coronavirus relief funds, and then made these suggested allocations for the governor, for lawmakers, to say, as you are considering where to put these precious funds, these are the priorities you should look at. And in the course of our work, they really fell into 3 big buckets. And Lori LaChance, I'll give her a lot of credit for this, really kind of pioneered this 3-bucket vision so we could get to organize this report: supporting Maine people, supporting Maine employers, and investing in Maine's infrastructure. And as you see here, the numbers were reflected of what was available in coronavirus relief funds and suggested as an order of magnitude. to be able to make that work. And so out of this report, we do have some pretty good outcomes that we can talk about. On the childcare front, we saw 8.5 million of CRF investments to support childcare providers around the state. Pre-K-12 supports ended up being the largest single allocation of CRF funds, and was actually more, and that with 329 million was more than even beyond what the Economic Recovery Committee suggested was allocated to pre-K and 12. There was recently the $200 million Maine Economic Recovery Grant Program was derived from the recommendations of our group. And that is now in phase 2 of its allocations through DECD. But what was really important about this program is that it was very intentionally created to go after the smallest, to support the smallest and most vulnerable small businesses first. And then in the phase 2 of the approach now at DECD, the eligibility has been expanded. One of the things that we heard as a committee early on is that the come one, come all approach of the PPP program was not great for small businesses that either didn't respond quickly or needed a higher level of technical support. And so this program made sure those businesses and small businesses were targeted first for relief. And then housing continues, housing supports 15 million in CRF for rental relief programs and others, related to the recommendations of the committee. So these are the highlighted outcomes. There have been others that have been kind of derived from the July 15th recommendation, but these are sort of the big ticket ones that came out of that first report of our group. And I'm going to turn it over to Maria to talk about where we are in our second phase, sort of sustain and grow, and give the commission a sense of our process as we work towards our final report on November 20th.
Great, thank you. So we're currently in the sustain and grow phase to map back to the state economic development strategy. And I'll read to you the vision of the economic development strategy, because that is what is guiding, that's sort of serving as their North Star for our work right now. By 2030, Maine will be an international leader with a vibrant, sustainable, environmentally responsible economy. And all across the state, the people of Maine will have access to an unmatched quality of life and good paying jobs. And so what the subcommittees are doing, we've reorganized our subcommittees. We went from 6 sector-based subcommittees to now 3 subcommittees that are meant to be more cross-cutting, looking across all sectors and more aligned with the framing of the state economic plan. So the plan's real focus was innovation and talent, with a lot of attention to infrastructure as well. So we switched our committee structure, moved folks around into innovation, infrastructure, and talent subcommittees. And what's been neat about that is it's allowed for new dynamics to emerge, new collaborations, relationships, discussions. And again, this was a Lori LaChance brilliant idea, and it's been very fruitful, and we've been very pleased with the boldness of some of the recommendations, and their ability, the committee members, their ability to think broadly and to think across sectors and sort of move out of that focus of just their individual sector. So looking ahead, we are in our home stretch of our work. Subcommittee recommendations will be presented to the full committee on Monday, November 2nd. And we will have a full committee meeting on Friday, the 6th, to really focus in on what our leading recommendations are going to be. We want this report to be really impactful, and therefore we want to highlight the most critical ideas rather than present you all with kind of a laundry list of things that should be done. So we're going to have to spend a lot of time deliberating as a full committee to identify what are those 5 big headliners. That's our ambition. We may end up with more headliners. So we'll see how that process plays out. We'll then be doing some polling of the subcommittee to see how well those determined headliners are resonating with committee members, if there are any major concerns. We'll have another meeting on the 13th to try to sort of finalize the framing of our report, as well as discuss some of the other very, very critical recommendations that we're calling essential recommendations that are critical to Maine's economic recovery, but don't rise to the level of a headliner. And then our report is due to the governor on November 20th. We'll all take a deep breath and celebrate a little bit. So that is where we're headed. And Tony and I would love to pause here and see if we can answer any questions from the commission.
This is Reverend Lewis. How are you? I don't know how the chair wants to handle this part of the meeting. Thank you for the information that you've shared. I think it's really important for us to see it and hear it. I guess one question that I have is, as you've kind of developed, as you assessed and developed some of the recommendations, did you have a rubric or a lens that assessed race, equity, inclusion, the status, the improvement, the status of folks in those particular categories? And if you do or did, is it something that you can share with the Permanent Commission?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So James has been an incredible resource to the ERC and shared the assessment tool that you all used. And what we've done is we've really asked our subcommittees and our committee members and leadership to consider the following questions as they've built their recommendations. And these questions are a much abbreviated adaptation of your assessment tool. And the first question we've asked folks is, if you're considering an idea that's already been implemented in some fashion previously, how did that impact disparities in the state? So look backwards for a second. And some of these recommendations are very much in line with the 10-year economic plan. So let's think about how they were written originally. And if they have begun to gain traction and movement, how has that impacted the state to this moment? And then the next question is, how could you better shape this idea and recommendation you're working on to promote all Mainers' access to its benefit? So those have been two of the questions we've asked people to consider. We did a poll of the full committee several months ago to find out sort of which components of DEI did the committee feel were most important to elevate, and what is some of the framing and the narrative the committee wants to put forth. And we found some very good agreement across the committee, but the thing that folks really seemed to point back to was the inclusivity perspective, that the Maine's economic recovery has to apply to all Mainers, and it has to be inclusive of all Mainers. And so not only did we think about racial diversity, but also geographic diversity. How can we make sure that people in Aroostook County and Washington County rural communities are included in this, and it's not just more focused on Portland or Southern Maine, for example. So those have been some of the conversations with the full committee. However, the subcommittees have also been relying on subcommittee leadership. We've got some really solid leaders in this space who have helped guide some of the thinking and the conversations within the subcommittees. And subcommittees are right now at this moment finalizing their recommendations, and all of these recommendations are weaving in DEI. And a few subcommittees have said, we can't just weave in DEI. We want DEI to be a headliner recommendation that is fully focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Maria and Tony, for your presentation. To Reverend Lewis's point, we really want to just open this up for conversation. It's about 11:44. We've got plenty of time. I will start by asking a quick clarification, if you can, Maria, because I hear the emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, but I did not see it in the allocation of resources. So I don't know if that slide that you showed us that looked at those initials, I think it was dated July 2nd maybe, so it may not even be current, but those initial allocations of millions and millions of dollars, where they go, childcare, housing, broadband, that kind of stuff. There's a disconnect for me between what you just said around the importance of DEI and where the money, where that shows up in those allocations. I saw something called immigrant workers, but I know that you know that that doesn't include the historically, generationally disadvantaged African-American population. It does not look at any, I'm asking, I don't see anything there that would suggest there's partnerships with the Maine tribes. So immigrant workers is a very defined population that does not include all of the populations in DEI. So make some connections, if you can, for me, between the money that's being suggested to be allocated and your priority around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
If I can just jump in on that, just a quick question. Was this commission able to get a link or a copy of our July 15th full report prior to this meeting? That was a question that Maria and I had. Okay, because some of those topics are talked about in detail in the full report for the full context for those particular allocations. Would it be helpful if I shared a link to that full report in the chat here for context?
Yes, I did throw a link into the chat, but
Oh, good.
I want to throw it in again just so folks have it.
Yeah, I think the link is fine. I'm just, for our listening audience, it's probably really good for you all to clarify that, as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, I think your report, your September report, did a really incredible job of talking about structural racism and how legislation can either exacerbate or address that. And the committee, I think, began a lot of those conversations and envisioned that the allocations we recommended in the July 15th report would be helpful to all Maine people. And we really emphasized Maine people as the first part of this report. So not only did we prioritize the recommendations beneath in each section, but we prioritized each section. So putting Maine people first. And we all know the importance of childcare and its importance not only in shaping our next generation and giving people equal access so that they can all come to kindergarten ready to learn on an equal playing field, but also its impact on women, on families, people's ability to enter the workforce. So the conversations that we had around DEI and the way we thought about these allocations were really focused on helping all Maine people and ensuring that the support systems are in place for everyone.
So that I'll just push back, Maria, because that I think you all know that you unless there are specific strategies aimed at specific populations, the application of a universal all will still result in disparities. It looks race neutral, but in fact it's not, because of all of the structural barriers that don't allow for full access and opportunity for certain populations. If you apply an all lens, there are historically disenfranchised populations that stay with those negative outcomes. You're not improving those outcomes. And in some cases, if you apply that universal lens, they exasperate the outcome. So immigrant workers or a focus on immigrants is not a proxy for focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those things are not equal. One makes up part of the other, but they are not equal in totality, because there has been pre-statehood a population of people who were enslaved in this state that the economy was built off of. And unless you have a specific strategy around how you will eliminate the wealth gap for those people and the wage gap, unless you have specific strategies it won't it hasn't happened in 200 years. It's not going to happen just because we want to make all lives better. Similarly, partnerships with the tribes seems to be, I'm sure it's a narrative, but I don't see it show up. And so unless those specific strategies are in place, I'm not sure how we improve the lives of folks who do not identify as either white or non-immigrant.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And your report recommendations around building awareness, taking resources, and awareness alone is not enough, that financial resources have to be allocated, I think are really important and things that the subcommittees are currently thinking about. I know that James Mile here is part of both the commission and the ERC. And James, I see your screen is not on, but if you are out there, I would love actually to have James's perspective on this really important conversation as someone who has been living and breathing this work in the subcommittee.
Thanks, Maria. I do think there has been some discussion within the subcommittee on that, and I think it has varied a lot. So I'm in the infrastructure subcommittee, and I think it's varied a lot depending on what the topic is. So I think, as someone mentioned just in the chat, there's where we've had recommendations around some like housing or support services and safety net programs. Those have had much more conscious discussion, I think, of making sure that racial disparities are addressed there. But I think there's been less when we've talked about some of the other infrastructure pieces like access to broadband or access to sort of traditional infrastructure like better highways and roads and things. So I think, from my perspective, there's potentially still work, and I don't know what's happening in the other subcommittees. So potentially there's still some work to do, I feel like, sort of making sure that all the recommendations are as focused on that as they could be. So that's just my perspective.
Could I just jump in for 1 second? I did a quick search of the word diversity, equity, inclusion, and race. And it's basically non-existent in this document, unless it's in somebody's title of their position, a very little bit around COVID. And so I think it's hard to find kind of the diverse population in the document. And I believe that you intend to be of benefit to all of Maine people, but it's not evident as you look through it. I think the word diversity appears twice, equity appears once, inclusion appears once, and race 3 times. And so it's a pretty thick document with a lot of different recommendations. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge those challenges that exist in the populations that oftentimes are the last to receive some level of support. And so I'm appreciative of the document, but that was just a quick little search on those words that would kind of pop out, I think, to the constituencies that I might represent on a regular basis.
Thank you. And before we go any further, I do want to acknowledge that some other folks have joined us. I want to thank co-chair Joshua Broder, who is now here, and Commissioner D. Clark has joined us. I also want to take a moment to notice that Commissioner Reed, Isaiah Reed, may have to leave early. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge all of that before we move on and give co-chair Broder and Commissioner Clark an opportunity to introduce themselves for the record, and we are being live streamed.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Josh Broder. In my day job, I'm the CEO of Tilson, which is a Portland-based technology company, and I am the co-chair of the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee.
Welcome. Commissioner Clark?
Morning. I'm sorry I was late. I'm Dee Clark, and I am part of the Permit Commission. I am African American, and I also am the executive director and founder of Survivor Speak USA, which is an organization that deals with sexploitation and trafficking.
And Dee, can you just say what population you represent on the commission?
People who struggle with housing, people in poverty.
That's right. Thank you. So welcome to you both. We left off, it is now 11:55, and on our agenda, I don't want to interrupt the discussion. We'll keep going, but I do want to make sure to turn the meeting over to the co-chairs for the Economic Recovery Committee to lead us in this discussion for the next couple of 15, 20 minutes. As I do that and hand that off, I do want to just pick up on one thing that Reverend Lewis just acknowledged around the lack of the terms themselves within the report, and make two other points. I know that what you're doing is you're linking the recovery to the 10-year state's economic development plan, and I have had a chance of looking at that 10-year plan. We are absent in that plan as well. So this is not just about the Economic Recovery Committee's work. This is about the invisibility of communities that have been here for a millennium. I mean, that have been here for generations. This is the invisibility of these populations in an economic plan. And to have to find yourself in a word that doesn't describe you, immigrant or diversity, equity, inclusion, and you don't see any money allocated to it, it's very, very difficult to not have a reaction to that. So
Can I add something to that also?
Please, Commissioner. Yeah. Oh, Kathy.
Kathy, yeah. I was looking at the report and looking at the members of the subcommittees and all that. And unless I'm not seeing it, I don't see any tribal representatives on any of those at all, unless I'm just not seeing them. So it's kind of hard to, I don't know, take, like we've said before, if we're not included, how do you feel included if you're not even represented in any of those subcommittees at all? So that's kind of disheartening to me, but I don't know about the other tribes. So
right. So no specific tribal representation. There may be someone who's on the committee who happens to be Native American.
Maybe, right.
There's no specific tribal representation. I just want to make sure we understood your point.
Yep.
Thank you, Kathy. Without, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the report and I'm seeing some language, but I guess I'm curious about the methods here. I do see and Joby, not to throw you on a hot spot, but I did see Maine Equal Justice mentioned, at least cited, in terms of referencing communities of color, disparities within the housing specifically. And I guess my question for the presenters is kind of, how are you collaborating with those other organizations in terms of developing this plan? What do those methods look like? And and I guess that also goes into the tribal populations as well. I know a few people who have been part of these talks. So I guess I'd like it highlighted and just kind of explained how you went through the process, if that's okay.
Thank you. And the specific connections to allocation of resources to historically disenfranchised populations. So co-chairs, if you will, take it away and lead us in this discussion. And thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thanks everyone on the commission for having us in. We really appreciate the engagement. As you know, we're a group of citizen volunteers, and while there are some members that work in professionally in diversity, equity, and inclusion, most of us are playing a bit of catch up and recognize that both our experience, our life experience, and our experience in working on this is quite limited. And so we're happy to have the support and the conversation to get to a better outcome. I apologize for just joining in time for our portion of the program, but I'll just ask, Maria, you provided an overview of sort of the mechanics and the process to date in your discussion. Yes, okay. So I'll talk a little bit about our goals here coming in for the November 20th report. As you know, we were convened in the spring, sort of in the midst of the first COVID peak, and no one could have imagined as we head into our second report that we would still be similarly situated at another peak. But nevertheless, our goal is to issue a report by November 20th. And that report, unlike the first report that you've seen, is really focused on a long-term economic recovery timeframe and is not specifically oriented towards providing supports or a response to the direct emergency. That was our original charge, and I think we felt like in the midst of the COVID emergency, there was too much going on, not specifically to speak to that emergency at the time. And so we added that to our sort of charge, recognizing that we had to go through it to get to the other side. But even as we hit this peak, we're resisting the urge to get involved in the issues that others are working on to deal with the response to the emergency and its impact on people and different groups. So for the November 20th report, we're hoping to have some big, bold, and impactful ideas. And we're trying to narrow that down from, as you can imagine, a very wide range of competing needs in the state to something like 5 to 7 headliners. And we've organized our subcommittees into essentially the 3 large strategy areas within the 10-year report, which include innovation, talent, and infrastructure. And when we think about this report and we think about economic recovery, the innovation group is primarily thinking about how Maine businesses will adapt to a new economy, and the talent groups and the infrastructure groups are thinking about how essentially they support those initiatives at a societal level. And in particular, in infrastructure, we're viewing infrastructure not just as roads and broadband, but also in the social supports that are necessary to have a safe and healthy and fulfilled sort of society, which undergirds the ability to have an economy. And so one of the things, if you've been following the infrastructures group conversation, is that there's been a lot of discussion of social supports. And I think I have a few more things to say here, but as Lori gets into talking about some of the things we're seeing emerge from those subcommittees, you'll hear some of those ideas and thoughts. One thing that did really impact us as we were coming into the final moments of putting out the July 15th report was a presentation we received from the Boston Fed, which highlighted the fact that the impacts of COVID were unequal. They were unequal on a racial basis. They were unequal on a socioeconomic basis. They were unequal for immigrants. They were unequal for First Nation peoples. And what really struck me in hearing that report from the Boston Fed, which is really, usually quite focused on, purely economic rather than social factors, was they felt that the economic factors were inextricably linked to those other factors that I listed, and that the existing inequities that existed before COVID were deeply exacerbated by COVID. So if there was a problem before, it's a bigger problem now, and it took us farther away from the DEI goals that we had been working on here in Maine. And so as we come into the November 20th report, we've had we only have had a few full working sessions as a total committee, given the timeline here. But the first one we did was on how to start coming up with a frame of DEI. And as you can imagine, for a group of 40 individuals that haven't worked directly with each other before, and a group that comes without sort of a lot of chartering or visioning work, one of the big challenges we've had is, what is our mission there, and how can we make sure that we include DEI as sort of fundamental to the work we're doing. And, frankly, as we surveyed the group, there was a lot of different lenses that the different members brought to how they thought about DEI. And so we've been trying to bring a little bit of order to the chaos, because the timeline is so short. This isn't going to be a one-year journey for us to form a viewpoint. We're coming out very quickly with actual recommendations, and those recommendations will need to have specific action steps that cause improvement. And so I think we're trying to get comfortable with the realization that this will be an imperfect process, but if we can be specific, I think Rachel Talbot Ross, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, just as I was joining, that naming and being specific is important in this, not being general. And so I think we're thinking about how that might be possible. We have some insights into the emerging ideas from the subcommittees, but to be very clear about what you're seeing coming out of the subcommittees, if you're following their meetings and their drafting, is that those subcommittees have not actually finalized their recommendations, and the full committee has not digested or beat up or challenged those recommendations. And so we're as I list these things, you're seeing sort of what we see coming out of those meetings, but they are not conclusions of the ERC. And so some of the big headliner ideas we're seeing are around connectivity, and in particular broadband, to those that don't have it today. We think that's something like 60 or 70,000 people in Maine, and arguably a lot bigger number if you think about people who may have broadband, but that broadband is insufficient for what's happening remotely today. We're seeing consensus growing around childcare, and in particular the early education part of childcare. We're seeing consensus building around affordable housing, both in urban areas where gentrification has driven up housing costs, and also in rural areas that are under pressure from COVID refugees from big cities elsewhere. So we're seeing that in every rural community in Maine is seeing housing prices really accelerate, which is obviously well, for homeowners, maybe something that feels good, but for people who are trying to have affordable housing, and the downstream impacts on rents has been quite challenging, and really undermines our ability to take care of our workforce. We've seen a lot of ideas emerging around workforce development and attraction. And so this is the idea that there needs to be existing investments in the workforce that we have, in addition to attracting workforce that we don't have, and investments in innovation-led economic growth. So this would be trying to add value to the natural resources that we extract here in Maine, into food systems and other things as we try and build a base for an economy. The committee has asked its individual subcommittees and members to consider what impacts to diversity, equity, and inclusion these recommendations will have, and specifically to frame what previous efforts in these areas, virtually nothing we're looking at is new, have impacted diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think I heard someone say as I was entering the meeting that general efforts have created unintended consequences in having specific increased inequity. And so we've asked people to look at those sort of historical problems in the way this has been done, and the way they're thinking about implementing these things now. And we've also asked the committee, and we've, I think, built good consensus in the committee that a recovery that doesn't include all Mainers is not a recovery, and we need to find ways to harness the potential and support all Mainers, not just Mainers that are in high-tech companies or in certain industries. And so with that, I'll sort of hand off to Lori, who can give you a sort of like a little bit of a drill down into some of the specific DEI initiatives that have been floating out of some of those subcommittees. But I'll just reiterate that the work is happening in real time, and these don't necessarily represent either the list of ideas that will come out, or specifically how they'll be approached.
Thank you, Josh. It really is an honor to be with you today and to talk about this really important work that you're doing. I had a chance to look at the report that you just published in September. To go back to your specific questions and observations about our first report, you were absolutely right. It is lacking in what it needs in terms of specificity to this issue. And I would just say, Josh and I first got the call from the governor to even form this task force on a Sunday in May. And within 8 weeks, we'd formed the committee and tried to come up with a set of recommendations to help sustain and stabilize the economy that was just in a free fall at the time. So our recommendations were big and bold, and our choice of the areas of investment were made with at least some knowledge that in each of these areas chosen, there was great inequity in terms of how it touched and affected different portions of the population. And that's the primary reason that housing rose to the top, that education rose to the top, that healthcare rose, and broadband, because the ability, the differential in how COVID was impacting populations were really hitting particularly hard in these areas. But it was not a nuanced recommendation. It was somewhat of a blunt force given our time. As Josh mentioned, we started to grow as a committee to be introduced to the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We heard from some of our members. We heard from some folks outside of the committee to bring different perspectives. We heard some presentations at the big committee level, but also at the subcommittee level. Folks were brought in. And while we still have much more to learn, it's really incredibly helpful to have this conversation right now as we begin the process of drafting our recommendations. So as my colleague stated, the charge of the ERC was from its beginning to not so much focus on the issues right this minute, but to step back and lift our eyes to the time, which we hoped would come sooner, where we could start to get back on track towards, as we have described, our North Star of getting back on that long-term vision of all that could be for Maine. We're supposed to look at the future. We're supposed to look at the possibilities and make the recommendations and the necessary investments to catalyze our recovery when that recovery begins in earnest. Our North Star in general is that 10-year economic development strategy, which, as you noted, doesn't fully paint the picture of what could be for all Maine people. And you mentioned that, and it's absolutely true. Although I think as you read through it, it is the intention that it help all Maine people. And we hope to add some recommendations that will make that true. So I don't, there was nothing intentional done, is my belief. But having your insights in this is going to make what we're producing better. I want to humbly remind folks that the ERC has limited power. We are a volunteer committee for a limited time, and we do have the power to inform, to inspire, to focus, and to recommend. And we fully plan to use those powers of informing, inspiring, focusing, and recommending through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've learned so much today that we will need to add in, because the nuances matter, the words matter, the detail of the recommendations matter. The true power comes in those who legislate, who appropriate, and who implement. And we unfortunately don't have those powers. Those lie with you, with the legislature, with the governor, and with the departments. So we hope to use our powers to the very best and fullest extent possible to create a vision of how we do move forward in a way that really does build an economy for our state that is much, much, much more inclusive and rights the wrongs that are implicitly built in the foundation of the economy that we have right now. Our committees at the subcommittee level have done all of the work of exploring the very aspects of developing the talent necessary for the future, the innovation within our economy that will drive us forward in a prosperous manner, and the infrastructure. And each of them is building recommendations through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they are the ones bringing forth the recommendations that will ultimately drive the report that we will issue in November. I want to give you some idea of what's coming out of the committees, particularly on this topic we're discussing today. And these aren't fully formed, and they do need to go through the full committee, but my sense is these will be central to what we'll be presenting very shortly. Under the area of talent, the recommendations being put forth, there are 3 bold recommendations in this area, but they're driven with this in mind, that Maine must invest in populations of color by welcoming, recruiting, retaining, and training to become part of this economic engine of the state. The diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations and work must become fully prioritized and integrated into the efforts of every department in Maine. And 3 ideas they've put forward, and they do have a bit of specificity to them, but a state DEI audit is being recommended, to create a 10-year state plan for DEI. And this plan should focus on building a more fair, just, and equitable state, and to hire cabinet level champion and grow capacity of individuals in all state departments dedicated to DEI and marginalized populations. Those are coming out of our talent committee. Out of the innovation committee, they recognize that the pandemic has also highlighted the fact that Maine's entrepreneurship ecosystem has not been serving certain needs of certain categories of entrepreneurs, such as women, people of color, Native Americans, and rural entrepreneurs. The state needs to examine ways to better reach and support these communities, including through regional development agencies and institutions, such as community development financial institutions. They're also suggesting that we take an action that will track the performance of Maine's investments, boosting innovation volume and the impact and inclusion of groups and communities that have often been left out of the innovation impact. So really track it and hold ourselves accountable to it. And that regular evaluations and thorough reinvigoration of the Maine Innovation Economy Advisory Board should be pursued, ensuring that growth-oriented company CEOs and diverse entrepreneurs are among its board members. Under infrastructure, there are recommendations coming out in areas of broadband, housing, childcare, potentially healthcare, and energy, and some things coming out of the emerging recommendations from the energy group include the equity lens, to include equity and cost considerations in the support and development of energy programs, particularly those targeted at low to moderate income households, to aid in decreasing overall energy burdens and shift towards low carbon heat and energy sources. A second for theirs is to support policy solutions that ensure fair distribution of benefits within the state and access to those associated benefits across all communities. So this is just a beginning. As we start to assess these recommendations, they will be vetted, they will be nuanced. We will take into consideration some of the comments you've made here today, and we would welcome your ideas on how we make these recommendations all that they can be for all of the people of Maine. So we welcome your questions.
I just have one quick follow-up to what Laurie is saying here, and it's on implementation, and it sort of expands on her point about, the ERC is not implementing or appropriating, and other people will take up our recommendations and do what they will. We have had good conversations internally about how a lot of the inequities in applying a program have to do with the lack of specific proactive proscriptive measures during implementation. And so I think we'd like to say something about that in our report. And again, ultimately implementers will do what they will, but we'd like to at least make a clear statement about how we think implementers will need and appropriators will need to think about how they take proactive measures in that implementation to make sure that support reaches the groups that we're calling out. And so, as we think about crafting that message, one of the things I hope to come away from this meeting today was to get more input on how we should think about framing that message and, what you've heard about or what you've experienced that has been sort of more successful and less successful in trying to be more targeted and thoughtful in that implementation.
Well, thank you both for all of that information and for that presentation. It is 12:20 and our meeting ends at 12:30. So I dare say that I'm sure that the commissioners have a lot of questions and comments to make regarding this, your report and your recommendations. I want to be mindful of your time frame, and I think you showed a slide that your draft report will be delivered to the full committee on November 12th. Committee polling on some essentials the 9th. So within the next 2 weeks, you are going to be moving a lot of the body of this report forward, it sounds like, Lori and Joshua. So I am going to suggest that the Permanent Commission, we will not be able to give you the full breadth of our feedback and questions in the next 9 minutes. So I'd like to work with Cheryl and a member of your staff to schedule another discussion, because this, I dare say, is overwhelming. It's really overwhelming in many ways. I do want to see if there are commissioners who want to make a comment, and I think the first one is from Professor Medford. Did you want to weigh in on this or ask a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you all so much for the hard work that you all have done. You all in the subcommittees and putting this together. As I was listening, there were many things that struck me, but one of them that was sort of particularly alarming was this sort of perpetuation of race-neutral language, and this idea of sort of using all Mainers is a highly problematic one. I think precisely the fact that a lot of non-white Mainers don't feel as though they're not made to feel as though they belong in Maine. And even some of the language of your report speaks to that when you're sort of talking about this effort to quote unquote welcome people of color, right? So if folks have already felt a sense of belonging, then there wouldn't be the need to do that work of welcoming. And that work, that sort of language, of that race neutral language, I think only perpetuates that type of exclusion. So there definitely needs to be a concerted effort in integrating language of race throughout the recommendation. And this shows up also in the discussion of power. So there was some language that you read that groups have been left out, and they haven't been left out, right? They've been marginalized, oppressed, exploited, and excluded. And I think it's really important to articulate those in those terms. So I'll just sort of pause there for now, because I know other folks probably have things they want to say also.
I really appreciate your sharing that. I can't speak for Josh. I'm on a learning journey, having grown up in the whitest part of the whitest state in the nation. And as a college president, I'm trying so hard to learn and get up to speed and understand all the ways and all the changes that are necessary. And I am really, really open to your ideas and how we can change to make it everything it needs to be.
Right. And I appreciate that, because this does take a lot of work, specifically with the language that we're using and making recommendations, right? And things like this, right? Maine is not a white state. Maine is an indigenous state. It became white, right, through these particular systems of power and oppression. And it's worth sort of saying that, right, on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Others who want to make a comment? We have about 5 minutes. I just want to add one thing, and that is that it is, you all know, and particularly being a president of a university, that language and words are really important, as we've all said this morning. But if there are only words and you cannot see the value then translated into funding and resources and very specific strategies, naming very specific groups, then just this umbrella of people of color, or an umbrella called immigrants, is really not going to get us where we need to go. And it almost feels like you're faking the funk there, like you're just going to put the, a language out there. And I would just caution you around this diversity, equity, inclusion. It seems like you're leaning heavily on a concept that has not reduced historical disparities. So to continue to rely on diversity, equity, inclusion as your frame, as opposed to one that is anti-racist, it's kind of a new dressing for an old way of really continually keeping people in oppressed situations. So this just over-reliance on this new language, diversity, equity, inclusion, is not comforting.
If I could just, I think this is, and thank you so much for the presentation. This is a wonderful opportunity to be proactive and provocative at the same time. And I think that I can't stress the language issues that exist here. What we do not want is to exacerbate the status quo. And I think, best efforts oftentimes kind of do that. And so I would challenge the leadership of the committee to be provocative, think outside the box, to push the state with language and concepts and ideas that deal with being intentional and proactive and calling things out as they are, not what we wish they were. And so, but thank you, tremendous work. It's a heavy lift, and I look forward to having additional conversations when the time comes. Thank you.
So we have about 3 minutes before we end our meeting. I really would love to get any burning comments, any last comments from anyone.
I think the question that I appreciate the comments that you've shared, Madam Chair, Dr. Medford, Reverend Lewis. I think the thing that this comes back to for me is that what we're looking at here is an economic recovery plan that's largely designed to get us back to where we were before COVID, and that certainly for myself and many members of this commission and folks in the state of Maine would say that that's not an acceptable goal. And that the question is, both economic recovery for whom and where are we trying to go? So I look forward to the continued dialogue along those lines, and I look forward to the continued push towards redistribution of power and resources as we go through this pandemic and pandemics of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I guess a final question would be to the co-chairs, and that is, how can the Permanent Commission stay engaged in this? Because I have a feeling we've got a lot to say moving forward prior to you finalizing those recommendations. What would a next step look like for you all?
I think we'd welcome a continued dialogue, but we have to move quickly because time is of the essence here. And so we are not yet at a place where we are drafting recommendations, but we are starting to form ideas about what those recommendations are. And so I think there's two areas where we would find, immediate utility in getting some help. One would be, as we form those as we form those specific recommendations, understanding how we can sharpen them up to make change beyond the restoration of the status quo. I found that comment just now really impactful. And then in a second phase, as we're pulling the language together, we're hearing a level of sophistication and thinking around the language that we frankly don't have on our committee. And so if we could get some help as we think about trying to say what we mean, not, sort of borrow other language that's not as impactful, I think that could be quite helpful. And so there's the words matter and are substantive, but also the substance is substantive. So I think there's a, input to the substance and then help with the language and the vocabulary, because I think that I agree that those words will really matter. Ultimately as recommenders, that's all there is for us. So, we would really welcome some help there.
Well, thank you both. Thank you all who are here representing the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee. We truly appreciate the opportunity to engage with you. I know it wasn't easy to get these schedules to match. The Permanent Commission will be meeting next Wednesday from 11 to 12:30 via Zoom. Cheryl Davis with the Department of Labor will make that link available to the public. Commissioners, you'll get an agenda and information prior to Wednesday, so you're prepared for it. But I dare say that we may want to take our next meeting and delve into the state's economic plan, the 10-year plan, and a discussion about this initial recommendations and report that we've received today. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of work to do. I also want to thank Kathy St. John for being here with us today and give our regards to Chief Sabatis. Without any other matters before the commission, I would just ask for an official adjournment, and thank you again, Chairs LaChance and Broder, for being here today.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you.
Reverend Lewis, you want to give us an adjournment? It's been moved and properly seconded for adjournment. Seeing no discussion, I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday, and thank you all again for your time today. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.